Let me ask you something about yesterday and resilience, and this is on the heels of a couple of weeks ago, and you said it too. So I mean, I'm gonna give you credit. Out in front a little bit of the streak, you said, hey, enough's enough, right? This is a good coach. It's a good program. Let the past be the past. The week before that, I said, you know, like good teams don't, well coached teams, that's what happens at Washington when you give away a half. You don't yield. You find a way to come back and win that game. Are we officially past now out loud the referendums, because the first half deleted tweets to the second half tweets would say we aren't past it, but man, I don't know what else has got to happen.
Well, yeah, I mean, I didn't I didn't tweet a thing during the game. I thought
It's incredible how we're in the moment.
There was a lot there, yeah, and I thought it was going to be a tough game, just because Nebraska struggled to play Northwestern, and Northwestern is relatively unskilled. You know, Ty Berry's a nice player, and that freshman's good. Martinelli's pretty good, but that's not an overly skilled team, and so. You know, Nebraska did not play well early. They were out hustled. I mean, there's no other way to put it.
Yeah.
But once they kind of got their feet under them, you could tell that the game was going to turn, and it's not a vintage year in the Big Ten. We need to be honest about that. It's a good year, but it's not. There's some teams at the bottom, including Washington and Northwestern and a few others, that just don't have enough firepower. And so Nebraska's got enough, and they got Bryce Williams, and that helps. And, you know, Juwan Gary always shows up. You can always count on him to do something in a game that changes the momentum of it. And, you know, they found a way. And yes, and what you're finding is they get a different unsung hero each game now. So it's, you know what you're going to get from Bryce. You know what you're going to get from Juwan. If Essegian's healthy, he's going to contribute what he contributes. But then there's always, who's the fourth guy? And on Sunday, it was Braxton Mears. 2 days from now, it might be somebody else. But you kind of know now that, like, they're going to get an extra contributor from that group of players that they're not stars, but they kind of do what they're supposed to. On Wednesday night, it could be Raleigh Worcester goes for 9 points and 6 rebounds and 4 assists. You just know that they're going to get that extra contribution from somebody, and that's probably what's going to get them in the NCAA tournament. I think they're 2 wins away. I think they need 2 more, and winning at Penn State would be big, and then they got to find 1 more out of that list at the end. And the list at the end is tougher than Penn State. So I'd count on beating Penn State. That's what I would do if I were Nebraska.
So Sam, are you a net guy? And I get it. Like, if you hate the quads, I hate the quads. I've hated quads from day one. But do you lend any credence to the net rankings?
Well, they have to.
Okay, so
that's one of the tools they use.
So
now
nine of the top 32 teams in net rankings are in the Big Ten.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and well, I mean, they have 18 teams in the league, so they ought to have quite a few. Like, at this point, there's a bunch. But I wouldn't describe it I wouldn't describe this as like the year the SEC has had, right? So like the SEC has, you know, on collection, just a better collection of teams, you know, than the Big Ten does, or appears to. You know, we'll see what happens in the tournament. But yeah, I mean, I think that they've the bottom half of the Big Ten's not great, and you know, I'm going based on kind of what I watch, and you know, so we'll see. Nebraska, again, they've done a pretty good job of winning the games they need to win. They've been very good on the road. You know, maybe they need 3 more. I don't know. As I look at, because I've kind of said 20, and they've got at Penn State, Michigan, Minnesota, at Ohio State and Iowa. Now, out of that group, if they beat Penn State, Minnesota, and Iowa, I think they're in. I do. I think they're probably in the dance. If they get to 19, and let's say they lose to Iowa, and they beat Penn State and they beat Minnesota, and they lose to Michigan, Ohio State, and Iowa, then you might want to win 2 in the Big Ten. I think it's going to be real close, you know, and so And I'd say 20, not because the NCAA tournament's looking at 20, not the committee, but just what it means if they get to 20. And then
you think 20 is safe?
Have to beat.
Like safe?
Well, I think it will help. So Penn State is a quad 1 / quad 2. Minnesota's a quad 2 or 3. And then Iowa's, I think, a quad 2. So if you get those 3, well, that's great. Beating Michigan now that would do it. So what you're hoping is that somewhere along the way you get it, you bag a game that's big time. And beating Michigan at home, and Michigan is currently leading the Big Ten, I believe. Beating Michigan at home, that's where you need the crowd. So next Monday night, that crowd's got to show up and be just crazy, because that's the team you got to beat. Like if you want to get all the way in and say, we just answered every question, you beat Michigan. So, we'll see how it shakes out down the stretch. I do think they're going to make it, but it's going to be tight, and I think everybody knows it's going to be tight.
We're talking with Sam McKewon from the Omaha World Herald. Sam, as you kind of look at, you mentioned, Penn State is right on that borderline of quad 1, quad 2. Is there a game in here that you look at? Obviously, Michigan would help a ton, but is there a game in here you look at where you go, hey, if they switch one of these, you feel significantly better about them making it?
Michigan. Yep, that's probably the one.
But you can't switch it for Minnesota, right?
Well, I mean, if you were going to pick between Michigan and Iowa, and I know this is a chagrin to Husker fans, I think you'd probably pick Michigan.
Sure, yeah.
But you don't want to lose to Iowa. So, that's a personal thing, and it's personal to everybody. It's very personal. They all care. Iowa cares. Nebraska cares at this point. That's all very, very, very whatever you want to call it. And so that'll be a huge game. That'll be a game that Nebraska puts a lot of energy into winning, because it means a lot to the players personally. So, I don't know. I mean, I think somewhere down the stretch here, they're going to win one that you may not think they were going to win, and they might lose one. Could be Penn State. I mean, Penn State's not a great team, but here's what I'll say about the Penn State game. Much like Washington and a little bit like Northwestern, it's a bring your own juice game. There's probably going to be 2,000 people there. It's not going to be super well attended. Nebraska's going to have to bring its own energy. And the advantage is, if you do that, the crowd's going to shut up, because there's not many of them there. If you don't, then you can't use the crowd to get you back in the game. So that's another deal where Nebraska's had to do this multiple times this year, where they've had to bring their own energy on the road, and I think they'll have to do it again on Wednesday in order to win.
Sam, I get it. I'm a nerd, but I know you like to stay abreast of things. I had the multi-view on yesterday, watching Creighton, St. John, and Nebraska, Northwestern at the same time. And I get conference officiating it's always been different, right? Different conferences are officiated differently. Is it more pronounced now with what's going on with officiating and the amount of work that they've got to do, and guys kind of having to stay regional with conferences? Because it's hard to fathom that. I was watching the same sport between both those games, but I was. And this is a guy that watches the Colonial Athletic. I watch Big Sky. I like hoops, man. So,
right.
But it's hard. It's very, very different watching how these games are played.
So how would you describe the difference between the way the Big Ten and the Big East are officiated, at least yesterday?
So they're close, but the Big East is still much more rugged. It just is, and it's not what happens. I've thought about this a ton, so I'm glad you asked me.
Yeah.
It's more how it's officiated on the perimeter than it is in the paint. In the Big East, you're allowed to touch significantly more away from out on the perimeter than you are
off ball
than you are in the Big Ten. There's a ton that happens off the ball in the Big East that is borderline incredible. I watch guys it's weird. It's definitely a different game.
Yeah. So here's my thought. I watch quite a bit of Big East and Big Ten basketball. Those are the two leagues that I watch probably the most of, in addition to the Big 12.
Yeah, the Big 12's kind of interesting. I don't get your thoughts on that either because they're kind of a tweener,
Yeah.
but go ahead.
Yeah. I think the Big East is uniformly more consistently officiated. I think the Big Ten has, and you can talk to all the Nebraska beat writers, I think they would say there's nights when you kind of know one thing may happen and nights when it could be something else entirely. And I thought yesterday, that game was a little bit inconsistently officiated. There was, and it actually tilted in Nebraska's direction as the game went on. But I thought there were some moments where, some very, very ticky-tack stuff called underneath. And
yeah, you could make the case, Sam, that little 5-6 minutes where Nebraska was like getting to the deck and they were scrambling out of the double, where they cut it to like, I don't know, it's 53-47 or something like that. There was like a 4 or 5 minute stretch where if that game's called a little tighter, Nebraska may not be able to make that run.
That's right.
Right?
Yeah,
like
I
it
thought
was super grimy.
I thought it was better officiated and anyway, the Big East, I think, is actually slightly more consistent. And so you're right. I think that it's rugged. It is true on the perimeter. I'm sure Creighton fans were very frustrated yesterday.
Oh.
I understand and I heard from a few, like the officiating in that game is interesting. And St. John's challenges officials to do, to look at the game a certain way. And of course, Rick Pitino is a titan in the sport in his home arena in Madison Square Garden. It's going to be a tough ask for Creighton. I thought Creighton played really well yesterday. And I think, they lost by 6 and oh well, and tough, but man, I thought I actually played really well. And I think, again, I tweeted that I thought Creighton has a better NCAA tournament profile run in them than St. John's does. And here's why. When you get to the tournament, a team like St. John's, which cannot shoot the ball very well, is going to run into that 12 or that 13 seed that, can beat you 55-53.
Yeah, they're going to get a pace of play team, and it's going to look awful.
Yeah, they have a potentiality of losing a game because they can't make a shot, and they're going to lose to a MAC team or, a Big West team or something like that. Last year, Auburn lost to Yale, and Auburn's a hell of a basketball team, but they have some of the same, extremely athletic, shooting comes and goes, and St. John's is going to have, I think they're going to struggle to get out of the first weekend because of it. Whereas, and I'm not saying Creighton won't lose their first game. I'm not saying they won't. They might, but I still believe that if Creighton makes shots, when they go out and they've been toughened up in the Big East, then they go out and they play these teams that aren't as tough as the Big East teams that they play, and all of a sudden the shots are open and they can make plays. And I think you've seen how the Big East prepares Creighton for the NCAA tournament, which is why you've seen them make 3 of the last 4 Sweet 16s, and the other one they didn't make. They took Kansas, the national champions, of final minutes. They are prepared to play in March based on the way the Big East prepares them. And the Big East is underrated in terms of the quality of its teams. You could take a couple of those teams that may not make the NCAA tournament, Villanova, and you could put them in the SEC and they'd be just fine. The Big East is a very, very good league. And so, Creighton will be prepared. And when they get to the tournament, then all of a sudden those shots that they didn't get earlier in the season are open. And they can do all kinds of stuff, and Isaac Trout's going to score 15. And so I'm really bullish on where Creighton can go in mid-March versus what's happening now. They're in a tough stretch, but they're going to be very dangerous. Nobody's going to want to play Creighton in a month.
I'm just praying for an ACC officiating crew in that first-round matchup.
Right.
Sam, one of the things that DB and I were talking about earlier and that we were most impressed with Nebraska and the way they've sort of developed over the course of the season was shot selection. It seems like earlier in the year, if they'd faced in a situation like they did against Washington or like they did yesterday, it seems like they would have started taking some more ill-advised shots, whether it was a bunch of Juwan Gary threes that maybe weren't great, whether it was maybe not being as aggressive to the rim. How have you thought about their shot selection development throughout the season? Because I think I would make an argument that might be the best coaching that Hoiberg has done over the course of the year.
Just didn't get out of pocket.
Part of it his roster selection, right?
Sure.
So he goes out and gets guys that are honestly 400 level guys. Like Bryce Williams had a PhD in college basketball when he arrived at Nebraska, right? And so so did Andrew Morgan, and so did Ravi Worcester. All these players, they all have a really good idea of how to win basketball games at a high level in high major leagues. And so I think part of it is he brings guys in who really just want to win. At this point, they're not about, well, what's my NBA stock going to be, even if I think Bryce can play in the NBA. And so I think they've done that, and Juwan Gary will do whatever's asked of him. And I think they do have to remind Juwan sometimes, get to the rim like they do. Don't settle for that shot out there. You can go past a lot of the guys that are guarding you. So, I think some of it's that, and some of it's just understanding time and circumstance, knowing that, again, some of the lower teams in the Big Ten, you don't have to get it all back at once. I think Hoiberg said that yesterday. You don't have to get it all back against Northwestern right away. You don't have to rattle it off, because they're going to go off again. Washington's the same deal. You can get into these teams and wear them down. And I thought Nebraska did a really good job both at Washington and at Northwestern of understanding that they're the better team and just taking the time to prove that over 20 minutes instead of trying to get it all back right away. And that's to their you can credit them with that. I think they do a nice job of selecting players who come in understanding how to play the college basketball at a high level. They're not asking, really young players. And that, I'll tell you what, some of the young guys they brought in, they haven't played as much. So they're, Gavin Griffiths is going to have to develop, and a few others. They've had some of the young guys have to develop in Hoiberg's system, or they don't play as much. And so I think he likes having older guys who know what they're doing.
Yeah, it's interesting, Sam. 5 road wins for Nebraska. They're tied for the top, 17, 18 in quad 1 wins with 6. Is it safe to say it's a good basketball team?
Yes.
Okay.
I think it is a good team. I think and again, it's a team that beat Creighton, and that's going to be a gift that keeps on giving here with the selection committee. They didn't just beat Creighton; they whipped them, and that will be very, very helpful in a month's time. And I do think Nebraska will make the tournament, and then it comes down to matchups and how they play against the best, how they play in that moment. Because I think they can break their long, they can get the first win in Nebraska history in the NCAA tournament. But they're going to have to, every night Nebraska's got to bring it, or otherwise they don't win. That's the thing. They got to be really consistent and really tough in order to get this thing done. And if they're able to, I don't know if Fred's going to be a Coach of the Year candidate in the Big Ten, but he ought to be.
That's Sam McKewon, Omaha World Herald. Sam, we appreciate it as always. We'll talk to you next week.
Take care.
You know one of the cool things?
What's that?
We didn't get cut off.
I do like not getting cut off. We could take cancers a little bit longer. Appreciate not having the hard outs.